So, today we're studying Acts chapter 6 through 9. So, in Acts chapter 6, we learn that the apostles needed some help, and they decided to get 7 people to help them, and they prayed about it, and one of those men that they chose was named Stephen. And it says in verse 3 of chapter 6 that the 7 men were of honest report, full of the Holy Ghost and wisdom. And they chose to appoint them over some businesses of the church. And so Stephen was one of these men, and he was preaching to a group of people who didn't believe. And Stephen was telling them the history of Israel. He was talking about Moses being a type of Christ, and he was testifying of the apostasy. He also saw Jesus on the right hand of God. And when he did, no one there believed him. And after the vision, the people took him and they stoned him to death. And they took his clothes and they laid his clothing at the feet of a man. And the man was named Saul. Now Saul was a wicked man. He was persecuting the church. He was taking people to prison. He was murderous in heart. He agreed that Stephen should be murdered. And so he was watching, and they put Stephen's clothes at his feet. Now, when someone is righteous and holy like Stephen, when someone's righteous and holy like Stephen, they start radiating the presence and power of God, and they start radiating who God is from the inside out. And so Stephen's clothing reflected the radiant presence of God. And so when they laid his clothing at the feet of Saul, I believe that either the clothing touched Saul and began changing him then, or that mantle that Stephen had, that Stephen was given, fell upon Saul. And as we know, Saul becomes Paul. But before that happens, he needed to be converted fully to Christ. And he was a wicked man, very, very wicked man. He had plans to take some letters so that he could arrest more Christians. He wanted to get more Christians in prison. That was his goal. And so he was persecuting the church members, and he was working against God in every way. And so what happens is he's going to take these letters so that he can arrest more people. And as he's taking them to Damascus, he comes upon Christ, the presence of Christ, a vision of Christ. Christ appears to him, and he asks him a question. He said, "Saul, why persecutest thou me?" And I love Saul's answer. He says, "Who art thou, Lord?" And so we see here that this man who knew nothing about Christ, he didn't believe him, he hated him, and he opposed him. And yet, when Jesus appears to him, he knew him. The presence of the Lord is powerful, and it immediately changes people because it's the revelation of who he is, and he is everything. And so as he appeared to him, his presence revealed to him who he was. He asked who he was, and Jesus said, "I am Jesus." And that revelation changed everything for Saul. He asked Jesus what he needed to do. Jesus told him he needed to go somewhere. He did that. He became immediately obedient in every way to the voice of the Lord, because the voice of the Lord, the person of the Lord, was revealed to him. And so he actually became blind for a couple of days after this experience. So he was sent to someone. That someone knew who Saul was. He knew that Saul was a wicked man. And so when Jesus asked Ananias, "You're going to minister healing to Saul or you're gonna receive Saul. He said, but Saul's a wicked guy. And the Lord said, no, I have chosen him. He's mine now. And so he sends Saul to Ananias. Ananias heals him and gives him the Holy Ghost and blesses him. And so that began the ministry of who we know as Paul. And his ministry lasted for, I think it was 40 years. And he ministered the gospel to many people. And he suffered for Christ. And he relates that suffering in a lot of his writings. And we'll be studying that probably later on. But just that revelation of Jesus. If you can get that revelation of Jesus, if you can really know who he is, if you can see who he is, if you can receive that revelation from the Father of who he is, it will change everything for you. And I hope this blesses you today.